The Curmudgeon Rock Report. Curmudgeon rhymes with bludgeon. Rock gods do it right. So do rock nerds. We're here for the rock. 1965, 2021, doesn't matter. Crude, rude, yet somehow sophisticated. Welcome. Enjoy the show.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of our favorite podcast and soon to be the world's favorite podcast, the Curmudgeon Rock Report. I am Christopher O'Connor, and joining me, as always, is our co-host, Arturo Andrade. I'm the heart, he's the brain. Say hi, Art.
Hi there, Hart. Greetings from South Korea, where spring is in the air, as is a lot of the pollen dust that gives me my allergies.
Oh, there you go. Bronchial asthma, ain't it great?
Oh God, yeah. Dude, I had to take here in Korea, when you get pills, the doctor gives them to you in packs. Like little packs. Each pack has like 2 or 3 little pills, right? And you're supposed to take one pack in the morning, then one in the afternoon, then one in the evening, like that. My allergies, it's either my allergies are so bad or Korean allergy medicine is so bad that I need to take 3 of those packs in one sitting in order for me to feel better.
Yeah, I was going to say, which means you're probably like shitting brown blood, right?
Well, I mean, it hasn't affected me that far yet, but I'm having a good day with allergies today. It's not so bad today.
Well, that's good. Yeah, I actually had a terrible day yesterday because we're now getting to the 80 and humid part of the early spring in Houston.
Yeah.
I said Houston, like I said, 8-9 months out of the year, gorgeous weather. It'll probably still be gorgeous. I'm getting married next month, and so it should be gorgeous on my wedding. And that's one thing I should mention, folks, is that I'm doing my research now for a first dance song. If you have any suggestions for a really cool, really sort of unconventional first dance song for a wedding, hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com, or you can hit us up at Twitter at curmudgeonpod there as well. For what it's worth, Sincerely by Harvey and the Moonglows is in the lead.
Oh, nice.
For that. So we'll see. At one point, I was thinking about Bruce Springsteen's I'm on Fire until it was pointed out to me that there's a line about him cutting a 6-inch river or valley in the middle of his skull. So probably not a good way to start a marriage.
Yeah, no. It's like all those people who loved, that song by the Police, Every Breath You Take, not having it played on their weddings, not knowing that it's a stalker song.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah, you have to consider, it's sexy music. It's great to dance to, but you kind of have to listen to the lyrics with a wedding song.
Yeah.
I can't really do Tupelo Honey, which would be my go-to, because I suggested that to our old college buddy, Stu, and his wife, Dawn. And, Dawn is cooler than either of us by about 14 miles. And so Dawn took the idea of Tupelo Honey and had her parents walk her down the aisle to Tupelo Honey, which is ridiculously cool. And they also got married on a nature preserve in Princeton, New Jersey.
It must have been a long walk, because that's a really long song.
No. It was just a snippet. It was the beginning of it, not the outro, which is, that's my favorite Van Morrison song. I mean, the outro, it just gets extraordinary. So, yeah. Anyway, on that note, one more thing before we get going here with our usual opener about new albums. Have to give a shout out to our new friends from the Record Refresh, and especially Joey. Hello, Joey. I'm sure you may be listening. We got some feedback. Here we are. We're in our 6th episode. We're starting to resemble an outfit that knows what the hell we're doing. If as you noticed that sound quality. Hey, Arturo's actually using a real mic.
Yes, finally.
He's growing, but Joey gave us a compliment that we obviously sound like we're having a blast and having a lot of fun doing what we're doing. So that's the point here, folks, that we are in a affinity niche. And if we ain't having fun,
we wouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, what's it worth? So, on that note, so as you know, we start these episodes with contemporary album recommendations, but we got to thinking that it really comes from our desire to see rock actually in our own imaginations be culturally like millions of people relevant again. And so, Arturo, what
Yes.
thoughts do you have on that?
Yes, this is the last episode in which we're going to call it contemporary album recommendations because that's just too long. Starting next episode, we're going to call this the parallel universe. Now, why are we calling this the parallel universe? Because these are real albums, by contemporary modern rock artists / bands that otherwise that probably won't you'll never hear it on the radio. You'll never see it on MTV. You might see clips of these or videos of these bands on YouTube because YouTube is basically the new MTV now. But basically what the idea is, if there were a parallel universe where modern rock radio was still a thing, these are the albums and these are the bands that we think should be played on the radio, basically.
Yeah, yeah. If we ran the radio, these would be the songs, and we got to give a shout out real quick that the rock radio stations in general are dying, but two really good ones are still out there. KEXP in Seattle,
Yep.
Which is all over YouTube because they have artists always come in doing performances. But then there's also, from my old stomping grounds in Westchester County, New York, there's WXPK, The Peak, which is this amazing kind of an independent rock station, but they exist in a universe where they're still under the impression that Squeeze and the Smithereens are the most popular artists on the planet. So, but anyway, if people still listen to rock and roll and all this is the stuff that we would program it with. I mean, that's
Right.
really the concept.
Exactly.
So on that note, what are you pulling out of the contemporary era this week, dude?
Okay, this is a Swedish band called Viagra Boys, and their album. Well, before I go into their album, it's a Swedish band with a British lead singer. So yes, all their songs are in English. They just released a new album this year, but compared to their first album, it's actually kind of a half-assed, underdeveloped mess. 3 of the 9 tracks are instrumental segues, always a sign of a lack of good material. Even though there are a couple of good songs, but not much more. So as a result, because of this, I'm going to focus on their brilliant debut album from 2018 called Streetworms. Now, how would I describe Viagra Boys? By the way, great name. That's number 1. Number 2, their music, basically, if the Butthole Surfers took a post-punk approach toward Frank Zappa, i.e. ramp up the social satire parody, ramp up the avant-garde noise, and cut back on the virtuoso musicianship, Viagra Boys basically take a 21st century approach toward the Butthole Surfers, is basically what it is. And they do this by expanding on the Surfers' patented satirical, lyrical commentaries on macho maleness and redneck white trash culture. And they do that while cutting down on the noise experiments and ramping up the music with like really heavily rhythmic, lean, mean, sinister disco rock. Sometimes bordering on funk, sometimes bordering on straight up disco. Standout tracks are the single from that album, Sports, which hilariously draws a parallel between the stereotypical male obsession with sports and their obsession with their penises, and their testicles, lyrics like beach balls, baseballs, surfboards, wiener dogs. That's an actual lyric.
Yeah, there you go.
And
Poetry.
the last track, it's this hilarious instrumental. It's called Amphetarniki. Amphetarniki has a propulsive, almost techno-like groove, skronking atonal saxophones and this really weird stop and start dynamic going on to it. So yeah, it's very post-punkish, but like postmodern post-punk. So yeah, if you take Zappa and the Butthole Surfers, put them in the postmodern post-punk blender with a lot of self-conscious humor, you get Viagra Boys. Highly recommended.
Well, I love the name and Viagra Boys, and yeah, this is something that's new to me. This is Arturo living in the deep end of the crates, and so that's my kind of stuff. Remember, one of our main principles is that dumb is not necessarily bad, and so that was a beautiful modern Picasso painting of a dumb lyric that you put out there anyway. So, okay, thank you as always. And then now for my album or for my recommendation this week. This is a young British band. Been around for a little while, but they're called Sunstack Jones, which is a very apropos name for them. It's one of these things of with a band called Sunstack Jones, you'd want to say, if somebody asked you, so what does this band sound like? What should be the answer? Sunstack Jones. Their stuff is a Sunstack. Now, to describe them, let me read a wonderful, and I'm sure that they probably wrote this themselves. And if they didn't, then God bless their publicist at the time. This is when they were promoting one of their records from 2018. This is what they wrote. Liverpool-based collective Sunstack Jones are something of a preemptive strike on the inevitably dull British summer, bringing forth songs that stand out like slants of light in a dusty old room. Their aim is to make immersive music, transporting you to a lethargic euphoria with billowing soundscapes to soothe the soul.
Lethargic euphoria. That sounds like a great band name right there.
Yeah, exactly. And the amazing thing is that's actually a pretty good description. I would have never come up with that myself, but so this tells you that this is a band that has tremendous self-knowledge. Now, since these guys are they're from Liverpool, they're English, so obviously any of these traditional pop rock bands from Britain, and they're going to be influenced by the Beatles, and these days they're going to be influenced by Oasis. That's just sort of in the DNA, and especially Oasis with their sort of quirky melodies and those lead lines and that sort of cross between sort of hard 70s rock and 60s psychedelia that you sometimes got from Oasis. Sunstack definitely caught that bug, but it goes even beyond that. They also have a tremendous gaze towards California. And
60s, 70s California.
Yeah, 60s, 70s California. They've got the harmonies, they've got the echo, but they also have a really strong sense of that sort of San Francisco lilting guitar line thing, and the echo and the reverb and the that stuff. And so it's like beautiful pain in some respects is kind of what it reminds me of. And so so this record, if you love that kind of guitar, which I do, Arturo actually, when we were talking off air before we started this episode, actually invoked the Beechwood Sparks, which may be the first time that any person on the planet has invoked the Beechwood Sparks since about 2001.
Well, hey, they had an album in 2012, The Tarnished Gold. The Tarnished Gold is fantastic.
Oh, I know. I'm not saying that they didn't keep on trucking, but again, it's just in terms of relevance and people talking about it in public. You probably have to go back to when I was actually writing full time when anybody actually invoked them. But it's actually a good call. So I would say with this album, which is called Golden Repair, so that's their fourth record. It just came out in October of 2020. It's 10 songs. I would say that the highlights are probably right in near the beginning of the record, How It All Went Down.
The single, yeah.
Yeah, it's a single, and you could see the YouTube video, which, again, it's a bunch of hippie-looking British guys in aviator shades hanging out in the desert.
Of course.
Yeah, with magic amps that nobody can see. The amps are an optical illusion. They're a mirage, but it's a beautiful little, very clean Orthodox pop song with that lilting, echoing guitar. And then there's a really lovely instrumental in there called "Should Have Been," about 4 minutes, but really just strong, beautiful, gorgeous California. Almost close your eyes and feel the waves cracking in the background.
Feel the molecules of love.
Yes, the molecules of love. Yeah, and so I know we have a running joke about the green test, but I don't smoke pot anymore since I'm 45 and about to get married although, which is kind of funny, by the way, an off-the-cuff observation is our neighbors across the street are pot dealers, and so I'm always telling my fiance when she starts having nausea or stomach issues that I can always go across the street and buy some weed.
Now I have another reason to visit you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Arturo's getting on a plane and coming to Texas so he can hang up my neighbors. Who, coincidentally, I backed into one of their cars coming out of the driveway one time.
Oh,
the guy was cool. He took care of the insurance, all that, and I didn't know later that basically that he's the neighborhood pot dealer. So that's a great way to end the discussion on Sunstack Jones. They make you want to go across the street.
Basically, folks, it's Beechwood Sparks meets Oasis, and they borrow Quicksilver Messenger Services guitars.
Yes. Quicksilver Messenger Service. And one thing of note, too, is that remember back in 67, 68, San Francisco and London had parallel psychedelic underground scenes going on. And for a while there, London was out San Franciscoing San Francisco.
Yeah.
So this really evokes a lot of that. It's look at it as 50 years of British rock development and history kind of rolled up into a new generation. And it's not just reverent, it actually stands on its own. So great record. Check it out. You can go to Bandcamp, actually, sunstackjones.bandcamp.com, and stream the entire record there. Actually, all four of their records. So God bless Bandcamp. Even though I'm sure nobody can make music off recorded music anymore, it's at least out there, and ain't that a wonderful thing? So Sunstack Jones, Golden Repair. That's my recommendation for the week.
And Viagra Boys.
So,
Street Worms. That's the name of the album. Street Worms, 2018.
Street Worms. So, and that's a classic Arturo move. It's a contemporary band that has a new album that sucks, and so he goes back into the Wayback Machine to 2 or 3 years ago, because as we always say that. Earlier stuff is always better than late stuff, and addicted stuff is always better than sober stuff. That's usually. Another rule. Yeah, usually in our world, if Elton John was still on drugs, Elton John would still be good. You gotta figure. So that's an aside. So on that note, Arturo, this is part 2 of our Got Live If You Want It trilogy.
Yes.
And so set us up.
Well, the name of this episode is actually Let There Be Rock, ellipses, on film.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Because of the coronavirus, as we all know, live music has been essentially reduced to bands and artists recording videos of themselves performing in their homes and or their garages and posting them on YouTube. Now, if you missed the communal feeling of being at a rock concert, obviously you can't and you shouldn't go to one now. The next best thing or things are listening to live albums and watching concert films. Last episode, we each gave 5 awesome live album recommendations. Today, we're dealing with concert movies. Concert films, some of them most of them professionally shot. Some of them are extremely well known. Some of them are really freaking obscure. And keep in mind, these are not our choices for greatest live albums and concert movies of all time. These are just the ones we love, although we do consider some of them to be among the best of all time.
Yes, and that's definitely true, and it kind of works out again. So concert films helped make rock and roll. I don't think that's an overstatement.
No, yeah.
Obviously, one of the movies we do not cover because we don't necessarily have to is Woodstock, and so
it's overdone.
Think of what Woodstock did, and think of how Woodstock was made, and think of what Woodstock meant, and then capture the film. And just remember, Scorsese worked as a cameraman / editor on that, so that's kind of how he got his start, ironically enough. But you think about the aesthetic of 50s, 60s rock and roll, and even early 70s, and a lot of it comes from these films, from guys like D.A. Pennebaker, Scorsese. Some of the great artists, and even in the 80s when Jonathan Demme entered the fray. And so there's a lot of iconography, and the spirit, if not the scope, remains. And so what we're going to do here is to prove that. Arturo is going to focus on newish. Newish films. Yeah, some of it's newish, whereas I'm going to focus on oldish. Not all of my recommendations are old. The youngest one is from 2009, but we kind of did it that way to kind of show that there's a continuum, that there's still a lot of great stuff being documented, and a lot of still great use of the medium to sell rock and roll as this sort of live wire act, and sort of something that happens in spontaneity and should happen in spontaneity, but also looking at, capturing cultural greatness on film. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, totally. I mean, and like you said, it's not just movies themselves, it's the visual medium is what helped propel rock and roll. It did it with Elvis Presley in the 1950s, him being on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Sure.
With the Beatles in the 60s, not just being
on the Ed Sullivan Show. Yeah.
On the and having movies,
Hard Day's Night, Help, and all that stuff.
They were all, and they weren't just movies; they were blockbuster hits. So they were, so these early rock stars, they weren't just music stars; they were movie stars as well. Especially Elvis, when he did nothing but movies
in the for like an entire decade. Yeah. So so it's interesting, and so you look at these things, and so my list will probably be more familiar to most of you, but it's interesting to revisit some of these things and how they've aged and what they tell us, and how we can look at them in a modern prism. So,
and if you have a really good sound system, you can blast it and pretend you're there.
Flashback to 1984. Were you a Michael Jackson person, or were you a Prince person? It may surprise some of you that I was a Michael Jackson guy back in the day. Say what you want about all the tawdry tabloid stuff and the legal entanglements, but as a performer and R&B musician, Michael was the shit. Arturo disagrees with me. Actually, he disagrees with me vehemently. Prince may have been more prolific than Michael Jackson, but was he actually better? Are you a Prince pundit? Or are you a Michael maven? Hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com and tell us how you really feel.
Okay. 10 films, 10 little reviews, and a penumbra of exciting rock and roll captured on film for all the world to see. Let us start this exercise now. Arturo, what is the first film on your newish list of films?
Well, I'm going in chronological order, not in order of which is better or which is worse. It's just chronological order. And I'm starting with a live DVD that was released in 1998 by the iconic British band Oasis. The name of the DVD is There and Then. I'm pretty damn sure the whole thing is on YouTube. And it's taken from two shows, November 4th, 1995 at Earl's Court in London, and May 28th, 1996 at the Main Road Stadium, where Manchester City plays their soccer games. Football in Manchester, England. And I chose this because this is a snapshot, or rather a screenshot, if we go by modern parlance, a screenshot in time when Oasis were at the absolute peak of their powers. They were by far the biggest band in the UK and probably Europe, and one of the best bands in the world at that time, riding the momentum of their first two all-time classic, timeless albums, Definitely Maybe and What's the Story, Morning Glory. What stands out about this particular film is how staggeringly loud these guys were live and how charismatic they were, even when they were just basically standing pat with minimal movement during the whole show. You know, they just projected an aura of like rock star coolness that at the time, you know, we hadn't seen in a long time. What also stands out is how the B-sides to their singles, you know, everyone knows their classic singles, Wonderwall, Champagne Supernova, Don't Look Back in Anger, Cigarettes and Alcohol, Live Forever, blah, blah, blah. But what stands out is that how the B-sides to these singles, songs like Acquiesce, The Master Plan, Round Our Way, were every bit as good, if not better, than many of their singles and album tracks. And it's just a reminder of how many great songs were pouring out of Noel Gallagher at the time, and how the biggest mistake this guy made later on was democratizing the songwriting in the band from 2000 onward, resulting in not a single album being anywhere close to this peak period, much less even consistently good. I mean, I understand why he did it. I mean, in interviews, he said, like, oh, I just don't want to be the tyrant anymore. I want to give other people a chance. I call bullshit on that. I think the real reason is that Noel Gallagher just ran out of juice. I just think he ran out. Some songwriters have it for a certain amount of time, then they lose it. I think Noel just lost it. And you know what? I don't have as many good songs anymore. Let's have Liam write some songs. And we all know Liam can't write songs for jack shit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
the other guys like Jem Archer and Andy Bell, great musicians and all, but no, those guys can't write songs for shit. And they couldn't even back when they were in Ride. So no, sorry.
Yeah, it's basically the same thing that happened to CCR. You know, democracy kills bands.
Yeah. Well, so with CCR, it's different. John Fogerty did not want to give up the songwriting control. The other band members made him do it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, I mean, yeah, it's a different dynamic, but what ends up happening is, is when the genius loses control one way or another. That's the end of that band. So.
And in this case with Oasis, it was just Noel Gallagher just ran out of gasoline. And he has written some good songs here and there sporadically throughout the last 20 years, but nothing with the level of consistency that he had in that mid 90s peak with this band. Not even close, really.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. So, yeah, definitely 98 Oasis, like you said, that it's kind of the beginning of the end, but at the same time, they still, that was 97, 98. You couldn't have been more popular in a country than they were. Right. And, like Noel Gallagher could have recorded the sound of him taking a shit, and it would have been, it would have been a platinum single.
Yeah.
At that point. And for what it's worth, by 2000, that's pretty much standing on the shoulder of giants. And basically that's what it sounded like. It might as well.
That album is a standing shower of shit, that album.
Yes, it is. I mean, that's when you knew it was like, okay, yeah, Noel was phoning it in, and Liam, can't get his shit together. But yeah, like I said, it's, the concert, like I remember one of my favorite SNL music performances of all time is them. I think it was actually they did Acquiesce and Come On Feel the Noise. It was was summer of 1996, and They just
And
were.
for the record, I actually like Be Here Now. I'm actually one of the few people in the world who actually likes that album. Gallagher was still writing good songs at this point. It was after, I mean, many people mark that as the end of Oasis. I still think that's a kind of an underrated record. Nowhere near.
Yeah, I do too.
But it's a good record. There's some great songs on there.
Oh, absolutely. Well, the neatest trick on that record is, do you know what I mean? The rhythm track is sampled from Straight Outta Compton.
Yeah.
So it's a neat trick, but it works.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, this reverse sampling ethos, but such was the brilliance at the time of Noel Gallagher. That's when he still had the juice. So, definitely go check out this film. It's definitely a document of that special time in history where Britain just blew up over these guys.
Also, one of the Titanic bands of the 90s.
Absolutely. Absolutely Titanic. So what you got next?
Next, another Titanic band of the 90s. This is definitely available on YouTube. It should be. This is none other than Rage Against the Machine, The Battle of Seoul. Now, this is available on YouTube. It was filmed at the Olympic Park Gymnastics Arena in Seoul, South Korea, during the Asian leg of their 2000 tour for their last studio album, the classic, The Battle of Los Angeles. Now, while there are tons of live Rage footage on YouTube, this particular show is incendiary. They're clearly, obviously energized by performing in a country they had never played before. And living in South Korea, I can tell you that not too many big bands make the visit over here. And if they do, it's really the stopover gig on the way to the main weekend gigs in Japan. Korean rock audiences really appreciate when Western bands come here, and they tend to go nuts whenever they do. Oasis, Nine Inch Nails, Muse, Metallica, they're all among the big name artists who have come here to rapturous receptions. A lot of these, seriously, I mean, I've been to a couple of these shows. A lot of them don't speak English, but they know the lyrics to all the songs. And you can hear a little of the crowd excitement in this film footage of this Rage Against the Machine show. But I can only imagine how it must have been like to be at this show in person. Even so, it's worth watching just to see a vintage Rage Against the Machine performance. They were one of the best, most riveting live bands of the 1990s. They were by far, with gigantic letters, the best rap metal band of all time, influenced all the other rap metal bands, and arguably they were the only good one. And on top of that, they had one of the most perfect discographies in all of rock history, with all three albums, and I'm not counting the covers album Renegades, I'm not counting that, all three of their albums ranging from utterly brilliant to up there with Led Zeppelin and Black Sabbath as some of the best hard rock and metal ever recorded. One of my 10 all-time personal favorite bands. And this is just shows how awesome this band was.
Have several of these, the Battle of records out there and recordings out there. The most famous is the Battle of Mexico City, which I'm familiar with. Which is another kick-ass show. I mean, the version from Testify on that is just blow away. I always tell people the best live show I've ever seen was in October of 1999 at the Roseland Ballroom. It was Public Enemy opening for Rage Against the Machine. And it was the perfect venue with the perfect acoustics for that band. And they were just on. I mean, this is like Tom Morello at his absolute peak. This is Zach De La Rocca at his most confident, and they're just rolling out. And the exciting part about this was about a month before, 2 weeks before the Battle of Los Angeles was actually released. So this is the first time that anybody's actually hearing these songs. And so they get into Calm Like a Bomb, and it just blows up like a motherfucker. And just some of the stuff was just fantastic. Testify, I remember just let's just put it this way, there was so much energy in that show, and it was just such a blast off. and dynamite stack that by the end of the show, I was exhausted. I was sweating my balls off and I'm exhausted. And I'm sitting there covering it. I'm supposed to be there with a notebook. And it was just absolutely intense to the point where I stopped taking notes. And I was able to write about it competently the next day. The only frustrating part was I didn't know the name of any of the damn songs. And so I had to try to find the sound guy at the end to see if I could get the set list and take a picture of the set list from the notebook or the taped set list, and was able to do that. But basically they were at a point where they could do no wrong, and they were the best live band, hard rock band in the world. So tight, and they could just do it, and just so good together. And Rolling Stone called them the mightiest band in rock and roll in a famous cover, and they were right. Mighty, 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 mighty. Yeah. So great selection there, dude.
All right, number 3. This is another of among my favorite bands. This is the White Stripes. Under Blackpool Lights is the name of the show, of the movie. I think they released it on DVD.
Yeah, Under the Blackpool Lights. It's good stuff.
Under the Blackpool Lights, right? And but you can also, again, you can find this on YouTube. And to my knowledge, this is a complete unedited concert taken from the January 27th, 2004 show at the Empress Ballroom in Blackpool, England. The same venue where the Stone Roses recorded a legendary concert film of their own back in 1989. Mm-hmm. Now, like the previous entry, this is another concert document of a band at the very peak of their career. This is this is a year after they released Elephant, and this is before the underdeveloped mishmash of Get Behind Me, Satan, and the Just Okay collection of songs that make up Icky Thump. Half of Icky Thump were outtakes from previous albums. The grainy, slightly old style quality of the film footage actually matches, I think it's done intentionally, it matches the retro vinyl worshipping, analog loving aesthetic of the band. It's also a reminder of how scintillating a live band these two were, with the interplay and improvisational aspect between Jack and Meg White pretty much bordering on telepathic. Of note is the barn-burning, searingly intense version of Son House's Death Letter, or Death Letter Blues, as it was originally known. It's a testament to how a band / artist can do a cover so well that they forever make it their own, kind of like what Hendrix did with All Along the Watchtower. The White Stripes do that with Death Letter. Also of note is that at this point, Meg White was not a bad drummer anymore. Now, one of the big critiques of the White Stripes in their early days was that Meg couldn't keep time, or that she was just a shitty drummer. But by 2004, they had recorded 4 albums, all brilliant, all classic, and they've been touring for more than 5 years. It's impossible not to get better on your instrument if you've been working that long. So not only does she keep a workhorse-like, a very Ringo-like steady beat throughout, but she throws a few little semi-fancy fills along the way. It's not all, it's not all shit, right? And this live document is a showcase for, in my opinion, one of the 3 best and most important rock bands of the noughties, and arguably the best. That's it.
Yeah, I definitely. And I got to defend Meg White that who cares about the timekeeping with a band like the White Stripes? It's all bash out. Basically, we saw them in 2001 in a small club in New York. I wasn't all that familiar with them, and my first take on them was take Led Zeppelin and only do Jimmy Page and John Bonham. And it's just boom, 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 boom. And Meg White was just the boom. And it's like, so who cares if she didn't have tasteful hi-hat kind of shit going on? It was just, bang the sticks. I mean, look, my friend Matty Karras used to say that Meg White couldn't keep time if you gave her a watch. And so my response to that was always, well, maybe if you had a sweep hand, maybe. But no, good drummer, or underrated drummer. But yeah, that's a good show. I mean, that again, that was at pretty much at their peak. and their height. And, Jack White is just a fascinating watch. Just seeing like the stuff, all the pedals and the angles and all the kind of weird stuff and the bouncing around, but also just sort of how he works to make it all. It's almost like he's his own conductor. I mean, he's kind of a strange dude, but it's like he's experimenting with the space as he goes along and figuring out the perfect angles and all of that. I saw him at Coachella, at the White Stripes at Coachella, and he was complaining about the audio the entire time. And I'm like, well, dude, your band is not made for a fucking 90,000 person festival.
Yeah.
They were like the perfect small club kind of band. I mean, and those types of things. And so, yeah, it's just interesting stuff. I mean, and a lot of these that Arturo is recommending, it's basically single show performances, and it really is just kind of documenting things as they happen. And so it's about the energy. And the White Stripes is one of the more mesmerizing, energetic bands to see live that I ever have. So,
and it's going from one band that's meant to be listened to and viewed in a small venue setting to another band that is meant to be viewed and listened to in a small venue setting. One of my personal favorite bands, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and the name of this concert film is just Live. Now, this DVD was released in 2009. I don't think you can get it on DVD anymore. I don't think you can get it. I don't think it's even available on YouTube, but I'm pretty sure you can download it from a torrent site. One of those quote unquote illegal ones. That's where I got it. It's just called Black Rebel Motorcycle Club Live. And the film chronicles BRMC's 2007 tour in support of their criminally underrated album, Baby 81. And it takes footage from 3 shows, one in Berlin, one in Glasgow, and one in Dublin. Now, more than me talking about how great a concert film this is in effect more of a chance for me to get on my soapbox and rhapsodize about who I feel is one of the most underappreciated and undervalued bands in all of rock, perhaps in all of rock history. When their self-titled debut came out in 2001, snooty critics, particularly in the UK press, turned their noses at them and they started to be referred to as Band Rehash's Mary Chain, BRMC, an allusion to their sonic similarity to the Jesus and Mary chain. But what these idiots and tone-deaf critics didn't realize is that there was so much more to BRMC than a Mary Chain influence. They were darker, heavier, and trippier than the Mary Chain ever were. And they incorporated elements of folk, country, gospel, blues, and soul into their sonic stew. And that was, of course, best expressed in their almost all acoustic 2005 masterpiece, Howl. They took the songwriting growth they showed on Howl, and then they went back to the studio and applied it to their earlier dark, heavy, trippy sound. And voila, they released in 2007, Baby 81, where they out Oasis with tough rock and roll swagger and arena-sized riffs and hooks. They out Mary Chain the Jesus and Mary Chain with fuzzed out guitar pyrotechnics. And they out Jonestown, the Brian Jonestown Massacre, with swirling psychedelic majesty. In my opinion, there are only 3 great all-time albums in 2007. Lucinda Williams West, LCD Sound System, Sound of Silver, and this one, BRMC's Baby 81. This film captures them on tour for that album, and it captures them in all their debauched glory. One highlight is during the Dublin show when they're playing the song Mercy and they slow it down and they segue it into this rollicking acoustic version of the old Ewan MacColl Irish folk song, Dirty Old Town, and the inciting a really, really touching audience sing-along as they go along to it. It's completely unexpected, not what you expect from them. But if you're familiar with their influences, It should be expected because this band, they had their one foot in that scuzz rock, but they had one foot in just majestic American roots music. So yeah, Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, listen to that live show or watch that live film.
I actually agree with you. I think Baby 81 is a really great record that is one of these unfairly dustbin records because, I said that band was fantastic. And I can just imagine that, the energy could blast you from the dashboard and could blast you from the speakers and could blast you in the bedroom. I could just imagine being in the fifth row of a BRMC show. And that must have just, that was, they were really powerful and subtly original band. I think they're one of the more underrated bands of this century, for sure. And I think Baby 81 is probably their best record, personally.
Yeah. For me, it's between that and Howl. And I really like their second one, the one after their self-titled album. And I mean, they lost a bit of critical momentum with that one, but it's unfair because Take Them On Your Own is a great, great record as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so again, I think a lot of these albums or these films that Arturo is mentioning are really just moment in time. Just kind of shows you, the majesty of these bands, and BRMC definitely deserves it. They're one of those parallel universe bands still. Yep. That even then I never quite understood, because they did have their moment on MTV when they first came out. Yeah. And they did get a push, right at the end of the 120 minutes era, like sort of 2000, the early 2000s, and then they kind of faded, which was too bad, because again, they're one of the best bands of the century. So good. Yeah. Good pick.
Absolutely. And now my final live concert film recommendation is purely YouTube again. Mm-hmm. And it's fairly recent. It was from 4 years ago. And it is by one of my personal heroes in contemporary rock music, none other than Ty
Segall. Boy, that was predictable.
Yep. From the La Route du Rock Festival in Saint-Malo, France, August 20th, 2017. This is a festival show, and it's professional quality. You can find this professionally shot video on YouTube. Just type Ty Segall, La Route du Rock Festival, or Ty Segall Live 2017. You'll find it. Like with Black Rebel Motorcycle Club earlier, this is an opportunity for me to give a shout out to and praise the man that I call rock and roll Jesus. Why? Because he's the savior of rock. That's why. Now, starting out as a garage rock wonderkind in the late noughties, his career has progressed into this ever-evolving tapestry where punk, metal, glam rock, grunge, and psychedelia weave in and out in a manner that assimilates his myriad of influences and in many ways transcends them all. On top of that, he's a phenomenal songwriter with an ear for infectious melody and engaging riffs, and he's an underrated lyricist as well. His recent records, 2018's Freedom Goblin and 2019's First Taste, have started to delve into progressive rock, Captain Beefheart style avant-garde blues rock, and jazz, particularly with some off-kilter Charles Mingus-esque horn arrangements. This live film, is taken from the tour supporting his 2017 self-titled album, which was produced by one of Chris's and one of my favorite rock album producers, Steve Albini. That self-titled 2017 Ty Segall album is, as you would expect by something produced by Albini, bone dry, free of extra adornments, loud, hard, heavy, in your face, and stylistically, musically, is akin to something like a really raw, grungy, loud Grateful Dead with sprawling guitar jams and all. Yes, folks. The words grunge and Grateful Dead are not bad words in this podcast. And
no, they certainly are not.
Yeah, this live recording, this live film is basically a reproduction of that album. About 80% of the show is tracks from that album. And needless to say, it rocks fucking balls. Just take everything I said about Ty Segall, put that in a live setting, and you get what Segall and the Freedom Band, his band's name, are all about. So yes, Ty Segall. What do you think, Chris?
Segall, he's one of those guys that just makes it all seem effortless.
Yeah.
Doesn't he? I mean, he's just like one of these guys that just goes out there and you almost get a sense he just doesn't rehearse and he's just going up there and just kind of showing off. And he's just got it. And
he definitely has it.
Talented guy, but he's also kind of a walking iconoclast too. He's just he's an interesting cat because what is he? He's got like seems like he comes out with like 3 albums a year under like 2 or 3 different names or band names, and he's got like side projects that have side projects and all of this. And so he's just kind of it's almost like a monster movie. It's like he comes alive. He creeps out of the walls and just explodes and just he seeps into the seats, and he's just he's kind of a force of nature. And so any chronicle of that is definitely worth checking out.
In the last couple of episodes, Chris and I tried to cure the COVID blues for those jonesing for live music with our live album and concert film recommendations. For our next episode, we'll get a little serious and talk about the coronavirus's effect on live music. Is this the worst thing to happen to indie rock and the rock touring set in general? What will rock look like once this ends? What will it sound like? Will there be any venues left? Even if there are, will anyone even go to shows? Our good friend and professional science journalist and avid music geek himself, Mike Eisenstein, will join us as we discuss how the live music industry will try to pick up the pieces after this terrible pandemic. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.
All right, so I'm done with my five newish concert films. But Chris you're gonna take us to the classics.
I am, and so yeah, like I was assigned with the hits, and they're not quite all the hits that you would expect. Some of these are a little quirky, but basically, I always say that our criteria for these lists are not objective bests. They're more driven by fascination, driven by the effect that they mesmerize us or they engage our minds, and so it's always about public service, but it's also about the stuff that just sort of draws our odd brains to them, and that's really what this is for this. And so a lot of these you'll probably be familiar with, and they're as much about story as they are about the concerts that they cover. So to get started, we'll go to perhaps the most important concert film ever made in the sense that it introduced so much. I mean, the concert itself introduced so much iconic music to America in a strange context. Now, this is Monterey Pop, which I'm sure all of you, at least listening to this podcast, know of the show. But let me give you some background on this. So the movie is a documentary, obviously, that captures the performances of the show and captures the vibe. It's made by D.A. Pennebaker, who's pretty much the godfather of the rock and roll documentary / concert film. He's done a ton of them. He's known for his Bob Dylan movie, Don't Look Back. And probably second on this list would be Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars from 73. But then there's Monterey Pop. Now, Monterey Pop is June 16th to 18th, 1967 in San Francisco. It was organized by John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas and Lou Adler, the producer, and a couple of other folks. And it really was meant to be a love poem to the summer of love and really kind of capture the vibe and capture the scene in San Francisco at the time. But what it turned out to be is that Phillips and Adler saw an opportunity to say, well, here's our chance to not only celebrate San Francisco, but it's also to turn you on to a lot of really great new music that we love and we think that you ought to love too. And so,
If I may interrupt, it's basically like us if we had a lot of money.
yeah, I mean, essentially, I mean, that's essentially what it was. It was a vanity project. Now, the thing that people don't realize is that a lot of times is obviously the most famous stuff in it is Hendrix and the Who and the Dead. Their performances.
Hold on. If I may interject, the Dead actually refused to have their performance in the film.
Right. No. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, the the original film is really tight, and there's only 14 songs in it, and obviously, My Generation by the Who and Wild Thing by Hendrix are probably the two most famous performances from it. But it's an interesting watch in the sense that there's a few things to take away from it. One, Pennebaker plays it straight. It's not one of these artsy fartsy films of the 60s and 70s with all the split screening and there's the color on color and a fascination with the audience. Pennebaker lets his camera linger onto performers, and he kind of lets these icons and performances speak for themselves because they're so extraordinary and so original. And nobody had ever seen anything like this before. You got to remember, this is June '67, and this is basically the first big show for the Who and Hendrix, and Ravi Shankar actually gets his introduction to a wider audience through Monterey Pop. And so Pennebaker's pretty much putting you in the gaze of the audience here. And so I think the main things that you should look for in this film and why I want to turn you on to them. First, it's the Who footage. And so the performance of My Generation begins with Pete Townsend saying, "This is where it all ends," which is not really true, that this is where it all begins. Definitely for the Who, but possibly for all rock and roll, because over the next 3.5 minutes, it's the performance of the song, which is not really a great performance of the song. Then it's basically Keith Moon going nuts and doing his thing, and Pennebaker actually doing close-ups enough so we can see Keith Moon. And so you can almost hear him thinking through the camera, what the fuck is this guy doing? And that's basically the emotion that we have when we're looking at it. And then famously, Townsend is destroying his guitar, and Moon is basically kicking his guitars all over the place. And so stuff is basically on fire. It's smoking, all of this. And there's this beautiful little 20-second sequence where we get a close-up of two guys in the front of the row of the audience with these, agape, like horrified looks. And then the final shot of this is Moon's bass drum kind of on its side with the band logo just sideways, and then it just gets engulfed by smoke. And so this is perfect. So this is your introduction to the Who. The other reason to cherish this film is the performance footage from the Mamas and the Papas. Reason being is that while the Mamas and the Papas and John Phillips have this legendary place in American rock and roll, as a band, they played less than 3 dozen shows.
Yeah.
And
they weren't really a touring band at all.
No, they were a studio band. And by the time they got up and running, they only had basically one tour, and they fell apart during that tour. And by the end of it, they all hated each other and were headed for divorces and drug addiction and all of that. And so literally the only good concert footage of the Mamas and Papas are this Monterey Pop set, this 25-minute Monterey Pop set. And, California Dreaming makes the film. And they were incredible. I mean, the band that they had behind them, the voices, Cass Elliot as a performer, there's just the arrangements and just the studio stuff from them is just beautiful and it shimmers. No, they rock the fuck out at Monterey Pop. And it's just really iconic. And again, Pennebaker just plays it straight and just doesn't basically films it without commentary. And so it's a fascinating document to that. The Summer of Love, but it's an injection of British born craziness into the Summer of Love. And so in that sense, it's a wonderful document and essential listening and viewing. So what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, I mean, another thing about two things. My first point about Monterey Pop, it's also a chance to watch the beginning of the end of the Byrds in their original lineup.
Yeah, David Crosby on stage with Canned Heat or something, or what?
Yeah, this was a time in the Byrds when David Crosby was trying to become the leader of the band and be the front man. Gene Clark had left the band about a year and a half earlier.
Oh, I misspoke. Buffalo Springfield.
Yeah, Buffalo Spring. Right. But with the Byrds, this was the show where Crosby pissed off all the other members of the band and kind of upset some people in the audience with his long ranting monologues about the JFK assassination and how the country's being taken away from us and blah, 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 yada, yada. And McGuinn, Hillman, and Michael Clark were just pissed off at him at this point. And after this show is kind of like what Crosby did on stage in Monterey Pop was what got the wheels in motion to get him fired from the Byrds.
And not only that, but they were pissed off that he went on stage and jammed out with Buffalo Springfield too.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that was the real last straw because I guess McGuinn couldn't stand Steve Stills.
Yeah, and I know I have a story about that. Neil Young didn't go to Monterey Pop because he was a member of, as we know, of Buffalo Springfield. So that's why
he was in the middle of breaking up with them at the time too. So
yeah, true. But McGuinn hated Stills. In the epic Johnny Rogan book about the Byrds, he describes it's like a 1,000-page biography, believe it or not. Like I know more about the Byrds than I ever care to now.
Yeah, God bless Johnny Rogan.
Shout out to him, one of my favorite rock writers of all time. There's a scene in which McGuinn kind of walks into the room as like Stephen Stills and David and he had Stills and Crosby. Crosby was still with the Byrds, and Stills. I think this is a little bit before Monterey, and Stills was teaching Crosby some blues guitar licks, right? And McGuinn walked in, and then Stills and Crosby looked at McGuinn. Hey, Roger, can you do this? And like he was doing some really slinky blues lick. And McGuinn goes, no, I'm not familiar with it. And then Stills turns to Crosby. See, I told you, as if rubbing it in that McGuinn couldn't really play guitar very well, which is some arrogant shit, considering that McGuinn actually was quite a good guitar player.
Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, Stills is a great guitar player, but I mean, come on.
Yeah, Stills has a reputation as being perhaps the most unlikable guy of that entire era. I mean, all three of his bandmates can't stand him. I mean, Young and him have this sort of on again, off again thing, but basically everybody hates Stills, but Stills makes them all their money because of his brilliance. So,
thing about it, quote unquote brilliance, because if you think about it, Stills, even dating back to Buffalo Springfield, he's always had this rivalry with Neil Young. And to me, it's like the most uneven rivalry in rock history.
Well, yeah.
Neil Young towers above him, and I think Stills knows that.
Yeah. Well, the thing about it is, Young has those eccentricities and genius. Here's the thing. Stills is a master, and Young is a genius.
Right. Big difference.
There's a difference. I mean, Stills, sure, better guitar player, not more innovative, not more captivating, I would pay money to see Young 19 and a half times out of 20 over Stills. Yeah. So, okay.
And of course, Stills is nowhere near the songwriter Neil Young is.
Oh, of course not. Of course not. Although he does, like, Wooden Ships is a pretty damn good song. But
yeah, sure.
But anyway, so that was odd little tangent, but it all comes from Monterey Pop, and so the Summer of Love being invaded by the Brits, and of course, like I said, it's the Mamas and the Papas, and then it's very funny. One last thought: very funny that you get that San Francisco
Scott McKenzie.
Yes, mixed in with Hendrix doing Wild Thing while basically summoning the demons out of his guitar. And so
lighting it on fire.
Yeah, exactly. So the juxtaposition of it is pretty amusing, and a great, again, one of the essential documents of the evolution of American rock and roll. Okay,
all right, great. Next.
So next, now we're going to talk about, I think, is the most mesmerizing and interesting of these films, and I may actually record a little mini episode about this because there's so much to say about it. Let the Good Times Roll.
Okay.
Now, this is one of those films that's sort of shamefully been left behind, and when we talk about all-time great live concert films, which is bizarre to me because it's wonderful, and not only that, but it's also puzzling, and it also is an unintentional commentary on the racial history of the development of American pop culture since the 50s. So to describe this basically, in its essence, it's a chronicle of a tour called the Rock and Roll Revival that took place in, I think, 1972. And it's a combination of two shows, one on Long Island, one from Detroit. But this is basically the very beginning of the nostalgia, old-time rock and roll oldies concert review shows. And so this is Chuck Berry, Chubby Checker, Bill Haley and the Comets, Fats Domino, the Shirelles, the Coasters, Bo Diddley, all of these artists. And the concert footage itself is just amazing, especially Bo Diddley and Little Richard. But ultimately, what it comes down to, this is a film about white nostalgia for how black music changed American culture. And these performers might as well be lions, monkeys, and penguins at the county zoo, because essentially what it is it's black culture and black rock and roll for the amusement of white teenagers. And it's striking because the beginning of the film, the opening sequence, is a 5-minute array of black and white footage of what it meant to be white teens in the 50s, with the classic footage. It's Alan Freed, the DJ from Cleveland, and there's that famous footage of the guy taking the album off the phonograph and saying "rock and roll has got to go," and shattering it over. And then the end of that section, it's pretty amazing. It's this preacher talking all about the evils of rock and roll, and then it goes into Chuck Berry in one of his sort of hokey country-ish outfits from the 70s, blasting through No Particular Place to Go and Hail Hail Rock and Roll. And so it's a striking juxtaposition there. And so you get this, and so there's times throughout the film they use a lot of split screen, and it's really striking that you're seeing at one point, as a for instance, there's a Chubby Checker performance of The Twist, and he's out there, and a lot of these guys are now fat and on drugs, and they have the beginner afros from the early 70s, and they don't look anything like they did as kids.
Especially Little Richard at this time was like wrecked on angel dust and cocaine.
Yeah, and he this is Little Richard at his absolute gayest for sure. But so this Chubby Checker thing it goes back and forth between Chubby's performance in the 70s and a performance of The Twist from the 50s, like television footage. And it kind of makes a point that it's screaming white teenagers in the audience back in 1954, and then screaming white teenagers in the audience in 1973. So this is, black music on display for white teenagers, and it's like it defines the culture for white teenagers. So But again, the concert footage in this film is extraordinary. Little Richard in his powder blue outfit with his cape and the big conch, and running through the audience and blasting through Lucille. Bo Diddley, absolutely fucking unbelievable in this film. So much charisma and
Phenomenal live performer. Bo Diddley,
yeah,
so underrated.
and this is not a guy who is encased in wax in this film. He's not like recreating what he did back then. Like Bill Haley in the comments do Rock Around the Clock, but they basically just, as if they were in a time machine. Whereas Bo Diddley's just bashing the fuck out and just doing Bo Diddley's thing. I mean, he's just extraordinary. And so you get a lot of that. It's this white nostalgia for black music. But the second half of the film, it really, the stars of the film end up being Bo Diddley, Little Richard, and Chuck Berry. And they talk a lot about how difficult it was for them. Bo Diddley talks about how they taught themselves how to cook on the road, because otherwise they were playing all these like white clubs and they'd have to like go in through the back through their own security. And if they wanted any food, they couldn't be seen. And so they'd have to like sneak through the kitchen. And so they all taught themselves how to cook. And there's an extraordinary moment in the film. The Diddley sequence is just jaw-dropping altogether, not just the concert footage, but in the beginning they show footage of him walking through a grocery store, and he's like the most charismatic guy alive, and saying hello to his young fans. And so he walks away from one young fan, and this girl, and she looks at the camera and says, "If it wasn't for him, we'd all still be listening to Beethoven." And then it goes to the arena, and there was an old doo-wop group that was on this tour called the Five Satins, and the directors, they have the camera on one of the guys from the Five Satins, and he's like, "Man, we're on this bill. We have to follow Bo Diddley. Can you imagine having to follow Bo Diddley? Man, we're fucked." Is basically what he's saying. And so it's just the streak. And then at the very end of the film, it's Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley just jamming out together on guitar, which is just ridiculous. And then the two of them like basically doing they're facing each other, and they decide to both start doing the funky chicken dance while they're, with the swinging legs and everything. So it's really funny. But again, as a testament to white nostalgia for black music and the mistreatment of these folks, and you're at the beginning of when rock and roll was starting to enter into its nostalgia phase. And for what it's worth, this is the tour that basically made all these guys millionaires. They most of them hadn't made any real money up until then, because they were all getting so screwed and all that. But this is how they all became like rich and famous. So let the good times roll. It is definitely on YouTube. I believe it's on a couple of the streaming services. Go out and run and watch this film. I think it's the second best live film ever made, behind one of the other films on my list. So there you go.
Well, I would like to say that there actually is a precursor to this rock and roll revival. It took place in 1969 at a small stadium in Toronto, and it was recorded and released as Live Peace in Toronto in 1969. Basically, John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. Now, let me say, well, he's not a famous 50s rocker.
I know what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
This is fun.
Yeah. But basically, this was a Toronto rock promoter named John Brower and another guy named Kenny Walker. These are Canadian concert promoters. And they had a rock and roll revival festival. On the bill was Chuck Berry, Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, Fats Domino, Bo Diddley, and Gene Vincent. They also booked a few contemporary bands, Chicago, Alice Cooper, where I think this may be the show where he ripped up the chicken and threw it in the crowd, and the headliner, The Doors. Okay. And just a day or two before the show, a hastily put together Plastic Ono Band of basically John Lennon in his, long hair, bearded hippie glory. It was him, Eric Clapton, Klaus Vorman on bass and Alan White on drums, and Yoko Ono on shrieking vocals. and basically they went on, I think, just before the Doors. The Doors were the headline band. But it's kind of weird how in a show that was supposed to be like retro rock and roll revival, you got, an ad hoc band of Clapton and Lennon, the Doors, Chicago, and Alice Cooper.
Yeah, I've read about this show in the past, and just the way it reads, it's like, oh man, if I could just like get reincarnated, or I can just go back in time, I can die now, and then they reincarnate me in 1969 just so I could be at this show, just to say, oh my goodness.
Yeah. Apparently, the band was under rehearsed because it was all put together like just in one day. Basically, the promoters called John. They called Apple Records, or the Apple company, and they actually got Lennon on the phone. And Lennon, okay, yeah, I'll do it. And at this point, they had to put it all together, and they had to contact. Actually, the way it is that they had to get through Clapton first, and then Clapton had to contact John and Yoko, who were still sleeping. So, hey, wake up! I got a phone call from Toronto. These guys are putting together a show. Do you want to go and play? And he's like, oh yeah, fuck it. At that point, Lennon couldn't go to the U.S. because he had visa problems because of a previous drug bust that he had the previous year.
Yeah.
So he could only go to Canada. So, so everything was hastily put together. They only had 2 rehearsals. One was on board the airplane.
Yeah.
And then they arrived. They got in there. They didn't know what to play. So they just played, guess what? A bunch of 1950s rock and roll songs.
Yeah.
And then they did I think they did Cold Turkey, and which was also a single that Lennon played. It did Give Peace a Chance, and they ended it with like one of those screaming, shrieking Yoko Ono songs. This one, Don't Worry Kyoko, I think is the name of the song.
Tell us how you really feel, by the way.
No, I like Yoko as a person. I think she's a great woman. I think she saved John Lennon's life. I think.
Oh really. Yeah, but as a musician, she's kind of intolerable. But
she's pretty much unlistenable. But anyway, the show ended with Lennon just doing guitar feedback and Yoko shrieking, and then the Doors came on stage, and that ended the show.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the crazier shows of all time. But this particular show, and again, at that point, like you said, revivalism was starting to bubble, but it really wasn't until that early 70s streak that this sort of became monetized. And again, this is an example of it, but it's history repeats itself. Black people come out and they cause the paradigm shift. White kids catch on, and it really takes off from there. So again, it's a strange film in the sense that the first half is all about, hey, remember how these guys shaped the culture and defined all the white teeny bopper stuff and all the there's wonderful footage, news footage of all these old public officials talking about the evils and the dangers of rock and roll and how it's poisoning society and all this stuff. But then the second half is basically talking about the hardships of Little Richard and Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry. One last excerpt, and then we'll move on. There's a wonderful scene in Let the Good Times Roll where Little Richard and his manager are in the backseat of Little Richard's limo. And, Little Richard obviously is as high as a kite, and he's in that ridiculous cape and all that. But the manager starts to lament about how Tutti Frutti comes out, and this is supposed to be Little Richard's moment. But then by the end of the year, Pat Boone has gotten it on the radio and probably makes about 50 times more money than Little Richard did from it. But Little Richard is like, well, he basically says, I have no problem with Pat Boone, and it's like, he did a good job. It's very hard to come out with that wop babaloo wop wop bam boom. It doesn't necessarily roll off the tongue. And he knocked it. He did a good job on that. And so this idea of Little Richard defending the white guy that ripped him off is kind of an interesting touch. It's like, like I said, I respect it. I respect any white man that can do me right. So it was just classic Little Richard moment. So again, I think it's the second best live film of all time. So go out and check it out. So,
All right, Chris, next.
moving on. So this is the newest entry on my list, but it might as well be an oldie. This is Michael Jackson's "This Is It" from 2009, and as you'll remember, this came out. Basically, it was released the fall after Michael died, and will remember. Michael Jackson is a genius. He's one of my personal musical heroes. A future topic for a Curmudgeon Rock Report episode.
He is most definitely not a genius. He was great, but he was not a genius. Prince was a genius.
No, Michael Jackson was a genius. Both of those guys were geniuses. We're going to have this argument. We're going to have a Prince versus Michael Jackson episode. I am the Michael Jackson defender.
It's a whole series.
Huh?
It's going to be a whole series.
It's going to be a whole series. And I will defend Michael Jackson to the end of the earth. This is the movie, and this is the footage more than anything else that proves how much of a genius Michael Jackson is. So let's give some context to this film. So Michael is broke, and very broke. I mean, he was a compulsive spender. He's coming off being on trial for being a kiddie raper, and he was acquitted. And he needs money. And
i.e., he paid off the plaintiff. That he wasn't acquitted. He paid him off, basically.
Now, basically, every witness, had been paid by Michael Jackson, and so nobody had any credibility, so you couldn't convict him. And so what happens is he needs money, and originally, so the promoters, these concert promoters, AEG from Britain, they talk him into what was originally going to be a 10-show residency at the O2 Arena in London. Well, there was such demand for it that they convinced Michael and his people to expand it to a 50-show residency that was supposed to be held between July of 2009 and March 2010. It was going to start in, I think, like late July. Now, he's in the middle of doing final rehearsals, and you got to remember at this point, he's badly hooked on morphine and anesthesia drugs. And his back is basically broken. I mean, his back is so fucked up from all the years of dancing and touring and all of this that it's basically his whole back is a herniated disc, which is why he's on all these drugs to begin with. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Now, obviously, he dies before he gets to do this residency. And so you would think, given how sick he was and given all that condition, there's like no way in hell that you would think that Michael was going to get through that residency in one piece. But then there's this rehearsal footage that they were planning on maybe doing something with, but probably weren't going to release it. So they make a deal with Michael's estate and the concert promoter. They're going to put this out as a documentary. And that's what this is. And it's all this rehearsal footage. And it is astonishing. This is a 50-year-old junkie with a broken back doing even faster versions of Wanna Be Starting Something and Jam and some of these other songs with all of this extraordinarily frenetic dancing and all of these numbers and all of this. And there's this extraordinary moment where he's doing Wanna Be Starting Something, again, way faster than it even is on the album, with him doing all of this crazy dancing. And then they stop it. It stops at one point, and Michael's like, well, I'm not really feeling that part, or not really feeling that enough. And it needs to be funkier. And so, like, Michael is in full command of what he wants, and it's a craftsman and a genius at work. And it shows that what it shows is the film is that a live show is a two-sided coin. There's the performance, but then there's the rehearsal and the preparations. And so you see all of this and, the scale, and there's going to be all the CGI and green screen shit and all the dancers and all of this. But you get to see Michael building these performances, talking about the music. My favorite sequence in this film is there's an extended section about the preparations for The Way You Make Me Feel, song from the 1987 album Bad. And so it's him working with the music director, and the music director, it's basically Michael talking about tempos and keys and all this other stuff and what he wants as far as the vocal arrangements. And the music director looks at Michael at one point and says, "Man, you're a guy who really needs to be at your sound checks because you're the only person alive who's going to hear what you want to hear." And how you want it. I can't sit here as the music director and give you what you want. You have to tell me it because you're so far, more advanced than the rest of us. And he goes out and proves it. So there's these vocal rehearsals, there's the dance rehearsals, and it's all of this. And it's, again, this is a 50-year-old guy that's basically 2 days away from dying, who can barely walk without being high. And he's working at this level with that kind of work ethic and that kind of insight and that kind of talent on display. And so, again, it's a jaw-dropping document to just how good Michael was and how locked in. And even when he was at his worst, he could still figure out a way to get to his best. And it's a damn shame that at least he never got to do these shows live in London, because they would have been spectacular. I still don't think, me personally, given the conditions he was in and what we've read since then, that he would have been able to get through the entire thing without breaking down. But this is it. One of the great documents, especially if there's no genre about movies about rehearsal. It's a one film genre, and this is the film. And so if you really want to get a sense of what rehearsal adds to the rock and roll canon, this is the movie. So that's that.
I only have one question. Does this movie show any of his little boy companions?
No, it does not.
Okay.
But it does show. Interestingly, do you know who Orianthi is?
Orianthi? No.
Yeah, Orianthi. She's a really good-looking guitarist from Australia who's just a shredder, just brilliant. She's one of these. She's kind of like a female Australian Steve Vai. Satriani type. She was going to work on this tour, and so there's also this footage of Michael and her working on like Beat It and some of that other stuff with her just absolutely doing this ridiculous stuff. And again, keep in mind the versions of these songs, like they're all fast tempos anyway. Now up the tempo to like it's kind of like putting a 40 like a 45 on 90 or or whatever it is. It's like want to be starting something, want to be and it just. And it makes sense. And so the way that this guy is challenging himself when he's basically, he's 5 3/4 feet in the grave.
Yeah.
Is kind of remarkable. So. All
right. I'll download it. I'll definitely download it.
Okay. So what? No other commentary about Michael Jackson?
No, I just want to know the tabloid dirt, man. It's Michael Jackson, right? Isn't that what anyone cares about anyway?
Well, no, you can say that, but Michael is one of the great singular geniuses in the history of popular music. And tune in about 6 weeks, and I will do my best to prove it to this other curmudgeon motherfucker on the other end of the line. So, on that note, let us proceed down my list of films. Next up, one of
my favorites.
Yeah, Stop Making Sense. And this is Talking Heads, obviously. This is about when we think of iconic concert films, this is basically the indie movie house concert film to beat them all. And this is one of those, everything is cool and clever and hip and cute, but damn what a great band and damn what a great director. And it's a total child of the early 80s. I mean, right down to the weird handwritten sans serif font, rock poster thing that goes on in the credits and everything else. But, here's a quote from Demi where he says, if you're doing a music film, you've got to be singing about something, or you have to be singing in a vocabulary that has tremendous appeal, or else people are not going to want to sit there for 80 or 90 minutes hearing this stuff. And between him and Byrne, they really, really do this extraordinarily well. And so, essentially, it's a concept film. It was recorded. It's 4 shows in Los Angeles, and it was over the span of 4 nights at a theater in Hollywood. But it's cut so that the concept is it starts, and there's so many iconic shots in this that a lot of people will know. Even if they haven't seen the film, they'll know the iconic moments. It starts with a close-up of Burns' foot. It's a boombox and a close-up of Burns' foot with white Converses. He turns on the boombox, and it has these preset beats. The camera scrolls up. He's wearing this like ridiculously natty seersucker suit, and so it's just him and an acoustic guitar and this beatbox with this really great dark version of Psycho Killer. And so this is the way this film starts. And so the concept of this, it starts with just Byrne and a boombox and acoustic guitar. You look behind him, and the stage is basically just as if they haven't even built the set yet. And as the film goes on, next comes Tina Weymouth, the bassist, and they do Heaven. Next comes Chris Franz, and they do one of the songs from More Songs About Building and Food. Then comes Jerry Harrison, and then comes the backup singers. And in the meantime, they're building up the back of the set. They're putting everything in. Then, like I said, the backup singers come. Eventually, Bernie Worrell gets there. The percussionists come out. The keyboardists come out. Everybody. And as the film goes up, it just keeps getting more electric. Then come costume changes. And then you get Life During Wartime, where like you get everybody jogging in place together for like 2.5 minutes. And then you get to the end of the film. And of course, the most iconic thing in it is Byrne in that ridiculously huge white suit, which he said was inspired by kabuki theater, and singing "Girlfriend Is Better," and then it ends with a wonderful version of "Cross-Eyed and Painless." But through it all, I mean, the energy just keeps building, the noise keeps building, the busyness of it, and all the while, Demi is in control with the camera. Shows Byrne when he needs to. Shows like perfect wide shots, perfect close-ups, all of that, and the thing, it never slows down. And so the concept is it starts small, and it starts slow, and it starts mysterious, and it just accelerates into like the most exciting damn thing you've ever seen. And so, and again, it's a testament to the era. Talking Heads is one of the quirkiest bands of all time. Byrne, for as pretentious as he could be, is one of the singular masters of the rock idiom, and he just a unique guy, man. He just, put him and Demi together. And one thing you could say about Byrne is, boy, he knew how to collaborate with the right people. Brian Eno and Demi and all of this. And so this again, it's not just. To me, it's a piece of filmmaking that almost transcends the concert film genre, and it's really what puts Demi on the map. And so, definitely got to check out this whole film. It's a really exciting document to this, but total indie movie house shtick. But man, does it work!
Yeah, Talking Heads are one of those bands that I wish I could, make me wish I had a time machine, go back in time and see them in their peak. Speaking of which, there is something on YouTube, Talking Heads related, that you can find. It's a concert film / documentary, but mostly concert film. And what it is them touring for Remain in Light, the 1980 album. And it's a show taken from a sports arena in Rome, Italy in December 1980. And it's them with the Remain in Light band, like the full band, all these Afrobeat drummers and the horn section and everything. Because that's the peak of like David Byrne's Afrobeat obsession, was that album, Remain in Light. fantastic live show. It's not as artfully done, of course, as the Stop Making Sense. I mean, that's an art film in itself. This is just a concert film, straight concert film, but it's really, really, really good. And it's just a really just great document of, in my opinion, one of the 10 greatest American bands of all time.
Oh yeah, they're totally there. But because I hadn't seen, honestly, before we started preparing for this episode, I hadn't seen Stop Making Sense since I was a kid. I mean, I saw it when I was a teenager, but at the time, I didn't really appreciate what they were pulling off.
Yeah,
and just the fact that they could, and again, it's culled from 4 different performances, but that was the show, which is this evolving. We're building the set and adding the musicians and rolling the snowball downhill as we go. And it's amazing that they could pull it off the way that they could. And so just the idea of it, and then just bringing in Demi to capture it, it was just a perfect marriage of concept artists and filmmakers and just real vision. So
yeah, sure, absolutely, yeah, totally,
yeah, absolutely. And so,
all right, Chris, next.
So now we save the most completely, utterly fucking obvious for last. Artie, three guesses as to which film I'm going to cover next.
Let's see. Kiss, one of the Kiss concert films, right?
No.
No. Okay. Is it Sha Na Na?
In some strange ways, I kind of wish it was, but no.
Okay. The Cranberries.
Oh, strike 3. Survey says The Last Waltz, which is, it's an obvious one. And to me, it's not like, remember last episode, we decided to skip Live at Fillmore East by the Almonds and Live at Leeds by the Who. It's because those are the ones everybody talks about. And, and that's fair. And look, The Last Waltz is the concert film that everybody talks about. And so, when it comes down to it, you can't really do a broadcast about great concert films without covering The Last Waltz. You just can't. You have to cover it, and for good reason. It's one of the great documents to rock and roll, and not only the glory of it, but the excesses of it. And and the way it's done. It's a documentary, but it's a concert film, but it tells a story. Now, even if it didn't have documentary footage, it would still tell a story. So, just as a brief recap, so this is a show. It's recorded at the Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco, and it's the last show that the band did as a 5-piece. I mean, with Robbie Robertson, in other words. And so they decided to go out in style. They were going to do it in this old ballroom, and they were going to go whole hog. They had an orchestra that was conducted by Michael Kamen. And what it turned into was, okay, so it's going to be a concert by the band, but they're going to invite pretty much all of their peers that broke out in the late 60s in America. Anyway, America and Canada, not so much England. And so it's going to be this celebration of their era, and not only of the band itself, but of their era. And as it goes through, so Scorsese does this as an experiment that actually works, where he takes 7 or 8 of the top cinematographers in Hollywood, and he has them stationed at different angles with a common cinematography layout. And all these guys are filming this thing, and they're doing it live. And so essentially what they're doing is he's sitting there directing these guys as to what to shoot, how to shoot it, and all of this. And they don't focus on the audience at all. It's a story about the musicians on stage. And so obviously at the beginning of this film, uh, uh, Robertson refers to this as the beginning of the beginning of the end of the beginning, which is kind of a good way of putting it, because by this point, everybody's just burned out. The best review of The Last Waltz is from Roger Ebert, who, when you first watch this film, you're completely mesmerized and engrossed, and you know, of all this great music and all of these great people and the way that it's filmed. I mean, all of these side angle shots of Rick Danko and Robertson just lost, and you just it's just so hypnotic. But then you get Roger Ebert that points out what should be the obvious if you're just watching it removed from the music, and he writes, the overall tenor of the documentary suggests survivors at the end of their ropes. They dress in dark, cheerless clothes, hide behind beards, hats, and shades, pound out rote performances of old hits, don't seem to smile at their music or each other. The overall sense of the film is of good riddance to a bad time. But he ends up giving it 3 stars because it's a quote unquote revealing document of the time. And he's right. You know, this really is. These guys, the extraordinary thing is these guys are all in their like mid 30s. At the oldest, they're what, 40 by this time? So they're not old guys, but pretty much everybody there is hooked on something, cocaine, heroin, alcohol, or whatever. They've clearly all been partying backstage to the point where some of them can barely function when they come out. And the first half of the film is just extraordinary because it just shows you how good of a band the band was. And it's concert footage interspersed with all of this anecdotal stuff about the shows that they did and their evolution and all of that. The second half of the show or of the movie is actually darkly funny because basically by that point, everybody's wasted. Half of these people are not functional. And they're supposed to be doing this run through like, oh, let's do some blues, and now let's do some country, and now let's do Van Morrison, which is just kind of the most random curveball. It's like the band is going to back Van Morrison on Caravan, so that's kind of the strangest one. Oh, let's bring out Paul Butterfield, or let's bring out Clapton to do Further On Up the Road. And then it's hilarious because you get Robbie Robertson, who at this point is like Hollywood boy, and you know he's made some money because he's been scoring Scorsese films and all this stuff, and he's out there trying to jam with all these people, and he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. And so it's just, you know, Clapton goes off and does this amazing thing, and then Robertson tries to keep up with him, and it's just horrible. But again, there's just the story basically is let's all have a celebration and have a good time at the worst possible moment of our lives. And then it's like, we're having such a great time while all the other footage is a discussion about how much they hate this shit. And the best quote of the film is Robertson at the end saying, "It's a goddamn impossible way of life." And that just sort of encapsulates this. So it's a very paradoxical film. It's a dialectic about the joys of music, but the pitfalls of musicianship and the career, and it's an undying accomplishment. It's mesmerizing. The music is wonderful, but it clearly is, and at the end of the film, well, first off, Ringo Starr shows up out of nowhere. It's like, where the fuck did he come from? But they do a version of I Shall Be Released, and Dick Manuel is so far gone at this point on alcohol and whatever else, he can't even sing. And so it's just this growl. And so it's a happy moment, but a sad commentary. So that's The Last Waltz. What do you have to say?
Well, one of my favorite scenes is a testament to like just the insane drug intake that was going on at that time. Neil Young coming on stage to join the band for a version of Helpless, and you could see cocaine liquid dripping from his nose.
Yeah.
While he played the harmonica.
Yeah, but it was even worse. So he's got the cocaine drip going on, but they actually painted out the booger that he basically he had the rock still in his nostril, and so
Jesus.
they painted that out because essentially, he had been up for like 4 days, and he's flying in while he's still on a tour, and like he even talks about it that somebody slips cocaine under his nose right before he walks out on stage, and at this point, Dick Manuel is gone by this point. Danko is on at the beginning of his going gone. He dies 200 pounds heavier, like badly hooked on heroin, 20 something years later. Levon Helm is, I think he's hooked on heroin during this point.
What I think was he was. I think he was. Not at this point.
Yeah,
I think
but it's up and down. But these guys are clearly just hurting, with the exception of Robertson Robertson positions himself as the star of the film, and because remember, him and Scorsese were rooming together at this point. And the two of them, they're like these two bachelors rooming together, and they're so high on coke, they're basically they're like stealing each other's coke to stay high. And so I don't know, but yeah, Robertson kind of comes across as wise, but also full of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there's a great documentary that came out last year on HBO called "Once We're Brothers." It's about the history of the band, but it's mainly from Robbie Robertson's perspective.
Yeah.
That's why it's called "Once We're Brothers." The subtitle is Robbie Robertson and the Band.
Well, yeah.
But it is worth watching because Robertson comes off as very loving toward his bandmates, as he should be. But yeah, he is a bit of an and probably still is a bit of an egomaniac.
Yeah, well, there was that, but also, I mean, well, the other thing too is that like these guys, like they organically made the arrangements, and Danko and Manuel got occasional songwriting credits. Like Manuel basically wrote "The Shape I'm In," and he co-wrote "I Shall Be Released" with Dylan. But Robertson got like 90% of the publishing, 95% of the publishing, and I remember Levon Helm hated his guts for that. Levon Helm thought that Robertson cheated him out of millions. And there was an interview at one point where he basically accused Robertson of killing Manuel and Danko because they had to keep going on the road because they got cheated out of their money. So I don't know. But again, it's the Last Waltz. It's a document of a really good time in the midst of a really bad time for all those people.
All right, now albums from the vault. These are old, timeless classics from the past that we're going to bring up. And these are our album recommendations that we recommend anyone out there who's listening check it out. Check out some old sounds. And my pick for this week is an album by a band called Pearls Before Swine. The name of the album is One Nation Underground from 1967. Now, Pearls Before Swine were essentially a revolving door of musicians that served the songs of singer-songwriter Tom Rapp, R-A-P-P, Rapp. Formed in what was then called Eau Gallie, Florida, now known as Melbourne, Florida, where my mom currently lives. They passed out crude demos of their weird, folkish, slightly rockish songs to every record label they could send to, both major and minor. The only one they got any response from was from an independent label called ESP Disc, which still is a New York City-based label that back then specialized in underground and avant-garde free jazz, such as Albert Ayler and Sun Ra. This was recorded literally on the cusp of the Summer of Love in the spring of '67 and released later that October. And Pearls Before Swine in particular, and this album in particular, basically mark the birth of what is commonly known as acid folk. At their heart, lyrically at least, the songs are mostly anti-war protest songs. This was the height of the Vietnam War. And these were protest songs filled with bizarre, surrealistic, biblical, and apocalyptic imagery, as well as, haunting philosophical musings. You have lyrics such as, like Another Time. There's a great line there. Did you find that the universe doesn't care at all? Did you find that if you don't care, this whole wrong world will fall? Stuff like that. And as far as the dark imagery is concerned, it's very much like Dylan, but delivered with the gentleness and the star-crossed hippiness of Donovan. And yes, this also means there are the obligatory, wispy love songs that you can't really avoid and get away from, but they are there, but they're good. And what really sets this album apart from other acid-tinged folk rock of the era is its sound. It's recorded very lo-fi. I mean, and this was an indie label in the 1960s, after all, right? The music is played in a very basic, rudimentary, almost defiantly garage rock style. Lots of simple chord progressions that is clearly supposed to evoke a childlike innocence. and they got Farfisa organ, auto harp, vibraphones, audio oscillator, although not used in the extent Silver Apples used back then. Sarangi and finger cymbals all factor into this weird mix that basically sounds like a group of guys trying to record music with cheap instruments found in a secondhand store and augmenting them with basic guitar, bass, drums, folk rock arrangements, recording everything in 3 days in as cheap a way as possible with a 4-track recording studio, but having it all come out aces due to Tom Rapp's haunting lyrics, his weird ass melodies, and these really evocative song structures. The album sold over 200,000 copies, which made it ESP Disc's all-time best-selling album. The quote-unquote this band, lasted a few more years until their breakup in 1971, which saw Rapp go solo. In the late 1970s, he quit music altogether, got a degree in economics from Brandeis University, then got a law degree from the University of Pennsylvania in the mid-1980s, and became a civil rights lawyer. He died of cancer in 2018 in Melbourne, Florida. The end.
Yeah, go figure. Like the guy that's like far out there who ends up becoming like the most normal, accomplished guy in the world. So, all hail rock and roll. But it's like, it is always kind of interesting when you think about how some of these people grow up. Yeah. and go on to do like these sort of strange things. It's like, it's the guys that don't grow up that are ultimately, I guess, more fascinating, but you never know what the arcs are going to be. So yeah, definitely got to check that out. Pearls Before Swine. That's a digging in the crate special. Speaking of which, now a lot of, I guess, folks our age will probably remember a time in like about 2000, 2001, where, at least in New York, this album got a big buzz and had a little bit of a cult following, but it basically died down and you don't hear about it much anymore. But I wanted to bring this out because I hadn't heard it in a while. The Langley School's Music Project. So let me explain what this is. This is an album, I think it was released in 2001. And the name of the album is Innocence and Despair. So what this is there was a German composer named Karl Orff back there in the 60s and 70s. And this idea of he had a theory that the way to teach kids to enjoy music is to just throw them into the deep end and just have them just sing stuff and enjoy it. But meanwhile, while also keeping it minimal. And so he had this style of instruments. It was basically acoustic guitar, percussion, and drum. and with a little bit of weird stuff mixed in here and there with some slide guitar or sleigh bells or stuff like this. But most of this, his stuff was just very minimal with like a little bit of strumming, and whether it was xylophone or vibraphone or this sort of like spacey, echoey type of thing. So now, fast in '76, there's a guy up in Western Canada in suburban Vancouver, Langley, British Columbia, a guy named Hans Fanger, who decides that he wants to do an Orff-like experiment himself. And so what he does is he rounds up 60 kids. They're basically like 10-year-old kids. He rounds them up into a gymnasium up there. And so they're going to do this Orff project. And again, it's a little bit of acoustic guitar, the percussions. And so he has the kids. He's, I believe, going back and forth between piano and the acoustic guitar, but the kids are playing everything else. They're playing the drums. They're playing this weird ass xylophone thing and all of that. But they're doing this, but they're singing like AOR hits of the day. And so it's stuff from Wings. It's the Bay City Roller Saturday Night. And they do Space Oddity by David Bowie and all of this. Now, this probably, if you haven't heard this probably sounds ridiculous, but it is an extraordinary album with the echo of the gym, with the joy of these kids. Like during Saturday night, they're all stomping their feet. And so you have this collective stomp that's almost its own instrument. There's pure joy in singing that SATURDAY and all of that. And the version of Space Oddity, it like literally does work as prog rock with that minimalism and this chorus of all these little kids. It like hits you right in the nuts. Another one of the highlights is this version of Desperado by the Eagles. Please keep listening. I don't mean to repulse everybody out there, but keep listening. But it's this little girl. And so what it is, it's a piano and this little girl singing solo. And there's this just this soul that comes out of it. It's this, this little gal voice, but you can hear the emotion. She probably doesn't even know what the hell the song is about, but the way that the feeling that she sings these words with, it's the best version of Desperado I've ever heard. Damning with faint praise, but still, it's still pretty good. But then you get into there's some other really interesting stuff. So you've got Venus and Mars Rock Show by McCartney, which that's how the album starts. And so there's Good Vibrations by the Beach Boys, and it's actually very funny because in the middle part they get these little tiny sort of dramatic voices to but hearing a bunch of little kids doing that part is very fun. And then towards the end of the record, there's a song that the Carpenters made famous, but it really started with a Canadian prog rock band called Clay 2, called Calling Occupants of Interplanetary Craft. And so this is kind of a sneaky one by Hans Fanger. It's almost like subversive to have a bunch of 9-year-old kids doing actual like weird ass druggy prog rock then. But again, with the combination of this live, the acoustics of this gymnasium, the xylophones, all these little voices, and just sort of this mood, it's a really amazing accomplishment. And Fanger, obviously, it's just proof that there's a lot of elementary school and junior high school music teachers that actually are geniuses that never quite got their forum. And so, Fanger and Orff and these guys, there's just these unsung geniuses that, all hail indie rock labels from the 80s, 90s, and 2000s that made some of these people give them their 15 minutes. So it's still out there. It's on all the streaming. It's on YouTube. The Langley School's music project, Innocence and Despair. Definitely, I wouldn't say one of my favorite albums, but it's an album that I still revere and whip out every few years. So there you go.
Yeah, I heard this album a long time ago when I was rooming or living with you. And I only heard it once when it first came out. I mean, I wasn't that impressed by it, but then again, you have to realize I'm not really into like choral, hymnal, choir music. This is not my thing. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I mean, maybe I'll give it a shot again. You know, that version of Desperado you mentioned sounds interesting, so I'll check that out.
Yeah, and then I obviously, I obviously have to check out Pearls Before Swine, because that was one. I think I had one listen to that record a long, long time ago. Probably, I mean, hell, I don't remember clearly, but it was probably something you turned me on to at some point. But
it's like low budget Dylan.
Yeah, I mean, well, yeah, isn't most knockoff Dylan low budget Dylan? But low budget Dylan done well. I mean, imagine that. But yeah, it's like I said, it's not necessarily choral music, dude. It's a bunch of little kids singing the Bay City Rollers. I mean, come on. But the way it's done is just it's spookily avant-garde versions of pop music by little kids having the time of their lives. So. Cool. And that's the Curmudgeon Rock Report worldview.
We've gone long today.
Yes, we definitely certainly have gone long, but that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
And so that's why there's always an editing suite for the world.
The Curmudgeon Rock Report will keep on rocking if you do. Catch us where you catch all the podcasts. We know you love rock and roll as much as we do. Support us with donations at patreon.com/curmudgeonrock. Find show notes and more on our Medium site. Join us next time as rock nerds smack you with knowledge. Stay rude, stay crude, stay sophisticated. Thank you for listening.